In the previous segment, we saw that the first characteristic of modern science is its willingness to admit ignorance. But scientists don't just go around saying we don't know. Once ignorance is admitted, they begin looking for new knowledge. How do they do it? They look for new knowledge by collecting empirical observations and putting them together with the help of mathematical tools. Empirical, when I say empirical observations, empirical is something that we can observe with at least one of our senses. We can see it or hear it or smell it or something like that. This is the second unique characteristic of modern science, its reliance on empirical observations glued together by mathematics. Now, people throughout history have collected empirical observations, but the importance of these observations was usually quite limited, because people, at least in most traditional societies, they believed that they already had all the essential knowledge that humankind ought to know in the Holy Scriptures and traditions. Everything people need to know was already known to Jesus or Confucius or Muhammad. The most important means for gaining knowledge was therefore to study and practice the traditions established by Jesus or Confucius or Muhammad. Why waste precious resources, time and money, trying to obtain new observations when we already have all the answers we need? As modern culture came to admit that we do not know the answers to some very important questions, it became necessary to start looking for completely new knowledge that nobody previously had. Consequently, the dominant method in modern research is to take for granted the insufficiency of old knowledge. We don't already have all the answers. Therefore, yes, we can study what's in the books and what the old people of the past say, but the emphasis must be placed on new observations and new experiments, because we need new knowledge. Whenever present observation collides, contradicts past tradition, modern science says that we should give precedence to the observation over the past tradition, no matter how venerated and how admired the people who established it are. Mere observations, however, are not knowledge. In order to understand the universe, we need to connect many observations about the world and create from them comprehensive, full theories. Earlier traditions of knowledge, like the big religions, they usually formulated their theories of the world in stories. Modern science is different. Modern science tends to use mathematics and not stories in order to build its theories of the world. If you look in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Vedas, you will find there very few equations, very few graphs and calculations, because when traditional religions and mythologies tried to explain the world and to lay down general rules of behavior, they were presented in narrative form and not in mathematical form. For example, the fundamental principle of Manichaean religion, one of the most important dualist religions, asserted that the world is a battleground between good and evil force created matter and the body, while the good force, the good God, created spirit and soul. Humans, according to Manichaean religions, are caught between these two forces and should choose good over evil. However, the founder of the Manichaean religion, the prophet Mani, he made no attempt to offer a mathematical formula that could be used to predict human choices or to quantify the respective strength of these two forces, good and evil. Money never calculated that, for example, the force acting upon a man is equal to the acceleration of his spirit divided by the mass of his body, or something like this. Hardly any traditional religion uses calculations and equations like that. In contrast, modern science is full of exact mathematical formulas. In 1687, Isaac Newton published the book The Mathematical Principle of Natural Philosophy, arguably the most important book in modern science and perhaps in modern history. Newton presented in that book a general theory of all movements and changes in the world. And the greatness of Newton's theory was that it wasn't full of all kinds of stories about Jesus did that and Abraham said that and so forth. It tried to explain and predict all the movements of all the bodies in the universe, from an apple falling from a tree to a shooting star, using just three very, very simple mathematical laws. Newton calculated, for example, in the second of his three famous laws of motion, that the force acting on a body is equal to the mass of the body multiplied by its acceleration. Henceforth, after Newton, anyone who wished to understand and predict the movement of an apple or a cannonball or a planet simply had to make measurements of the mass and the acceleration of the object and of the forces acting on the apple or on the planet, and by inserting these numbers into the equations provided by Newton, the future position of the object could be predicted. And it worked like magic. Now, not all phenomena in the world can be reduced so neatly to an exact Newtonian equation. We don't have exact equations, at least not yet, to understand evolution or economics or human psychology. But in these fields too, scientists combine empirical evidence to form general theories by means of mathematical tools. The only difference is, the main difference is, let's say, between psychology and Newtonian mechanics in physics, is that psychologists use statistics and probability instead of exact equations. But they still use mathematical tools from a different field, statistics and probability, but it's still mathematics. If you wish to understand the growing importance of mathematics in the modern world, you simply need to take a brief look at the history of education. Throughout most of history, in almost all cultures, from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe and China and India, mathematics was considered an esoteric field that even educated people rarely studied at length. In medieval Europe, the core of the educational curriculum consisted of logic, grammar, and rhetoric. The teaching of mathematics seldom went beyond simple arithmetic calculations and geometry. Nobody in medieval Europe studied statistics, and the undisputed queen of all the sciences, all learning in the Middle Ages was theology, not mathematics. Today in the world, very few students study theology, very few students study rhetoric. Logic is restricted mainly to philosophy departments. There are very few people, say, in a biology department or in economic department that study logic. But more and more students in more and more departments are motivated or forced to study more and more mathematics. There is an irresistible drift towards what is called the exact sciences. And they are called the exact sciences because they use mathematical tools. Even fields of study, which are traditionally part of the humanities, such as studying the human psychology, today they increasingly rely on mathematics, and they seek to present themselves as exact sciences, just like physics or chemistry. Statistics courses in statistics are now part of the basic requirements, not just in the department of physics or biology, but also in the departments of psychology, sociology, economics, political science, international relations, and so forth. For example, in my university, the Hebrew University, if you open the course catalog of the psychology department, you will find that the first required course in the curriculum of psychology students is the course Introduction to Statistics and Statistical Methodology in Psychological Research. This is the first thing you learn as a student of psychology. The first thing you learn is statistics. Similarly, in the second year psychology students, they must take the course Statistical Methods in Psychological Research, which is a continuation of the first year course. Now, Confucius or Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad, they would have been amazed, bewildered, if you told them that in order to understand the human psyche and in order to cure its illnesses, the first thing that you must study is statistics. None of them, not Buddha and not Muhammad, not Confucius, none of them studied statistics. Who thought about it back then? The centrality of mathematics to modern science is one of the main reasons why many people have such a hard time understanding science. As we noted in a previous lesson, the human mind is not adapted to thinking in numbers. For millions of years of evolution, people did not need to deal with numbers and mathematics, so we are not built to it. Therefore, out of the 7 billion people today in the world, ask yourself, how many of these 7 billion people really understand quantum mechanics or cell biology or macroeconomics? Very few of them. Science nevertheless enjoys immense prestige, not because people understand it, most people don't, but because science gives us immense new powers. Presidents and generals, they may not understand nuclear physics, but they have a pretty good grasp of what nuclear bombs can do. This is the third unique and important characteristic of modern science. Modern science is not interested just in formulating theories about the world. The real aim of modern science is to gain new power. In science, modern science, the real test of knowledge is not whether something is true, but whether something empowers us, gives us power. Scientists today usually assume that no theory is correct in 100%. Consequently, truth is a poor test for knowledge. The real test for knowledge is utility. Something is considered real knowledge only if it gives us new powers and new technologies and enables us to do new things. This connection between science and technology is today so strong that people tend to confuse the two. We think of science and technology as the same thing. We tend to think that it's impossible to develop new technologies without scientific research, and that there is little point in doing research unless it results in some new technology. But in fact, the close relationship between science and technology is a very recent phenomenon. Prior to, say, 1500, science and technology were totally different fields of activity. They became connected only gradually in the early modern era, and they became truly inseparable one from the other only in the 19th century, in the last 200 years. Prior to that, even say in the year 1800, most rulers who wanted a strong army and most businessmen who wanted to be successful in business, they did not bother to finance research in physics or biology or economics because they didn't see what is the connection between scientific research and technological power. Now, there are, of course, exceptions to this rule here and there. A good historian can find precedent to almost everything. But an even better historian knows when these precedents are only curiosities that cloud the big picture. And we should focus on the forest, not on the individual trees. And generally speaking, most pre-modern kings and merchants and bankers and so forth, they did not finance research about the universe in order to develop new technologies. And similarly, most thinkers and philosophers, they did not try to translate their findings about the universe into technological gadgets. Rulers did finance educational institutions like universities and monasteries and so forth, but the aim of these institutions was to spread and preserve traditional knowledge for the purpose of supporting the existing order, not to develop new technologies. Now, new technologies did appear here and there, but these new technologies in the pre-modern world, they were usually the outcome of the efforts of uneducated craftsmen using the methods of trial and error. They were not the outcome of scholars pursuing systematic scientific research. The very concept of research and development department, which is very central today for armies and businesses and so forth, was alien to the mindset of early modern kingdoms and churches and armies and businesses. All of these kingdoms and armies and churches, they had very little interest in development, and in any case, they saw little connection between development of new technology and research. For example, cart manufacturers manufactured the same model of cart year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. They did not try all the time to invent and develop new models of carts. And even if, here and there, a new model of a cart or a wagon was developed, it was done by some very good carpenter who came up with a new idea of how to connect the wheel to the other wheel or something like that. It did not result from somebody in a university studying physics or chemistry and coming up with a new design for carts. Similarly, most armies in the pre-modern era, even in the early modern era, they had no research and development department, and they were uninterested in science and technology. Up until the 19th century, even in the period of Napoleon, the vast majority of military revolutions was a product of organizational, not technological changes. When alien civilizations met for the first time, say when Europeans reached America for the first time, technological gaps between them sometimes played a very important role. But even in such cases, the technological gap was not intentional, and very few generals or kings sought to deliberately create or enlarge such technological gaps. Most empires in history did not rise thanks to some kind of magic weapon, a technological wizardry, and the rulers of most of these empires did not seek to invest more and more money in creating new wonder weapons. For example, the Arabs did not defeat the Sassanid and Byzantine Empire because they had, say, superior bows or better swords. The Seljuks had no technological advantage over the Byzantines. The Mongols did not conquer China because they had better technology. In fact, in all of these cases, the vanquished, the Chinese, the Byzantines, the Sassanids, they enjoyed better military and civilian technology than the victors, the Mongols and the Seljuks and the Arabs. The Roman army is a particularly good example for this. The Roman army was probably the best army in the world in its day, but its advantage rested only on efficient organization, iron discipline of the soldiers, and huge manpower reserves. Technologically, Rome had absolutely no advantage over its rivals like Carthage or Macedonia or the Seleucid Empire. And the Roman army, throughout centuries of existence, never set up a research and development department, and its weapons remained more or less the same weapons for centuries on end. Because science was not seen as something that gives humans new powers. And because people thought that in any case, all the major discoveries have already been made, and they know everything that is important to know about the world, people did not believe in the possibility of progress. However, once modern science argued that there are many important things which we still don't know, and that new knowledge can be translated into new power, everything changed. People began to believe in the possibility of progress everywhere, in medicine, in economics, in politics, everywhere. And this revolutionized the world. It revolutionized not only science itself, it also revolutionized politics and economics and society and culture. This revolution of progress will be discussed in the next segment.